If we take modest steps now to rein in the growth of spending in programs like Medicare and Social Security, we can go a long way towards reducing those unfunded liabilities down the road. But the longer Congress waits, the longer Congress allows the spending to grow on autopilot, the harder it is going to be to get these programs in line without more drastic measures.
Welcome again to another episode of the Let People Prosper Show. My name is Dr. Vance Ginn. I hope you're having a prosperous day. Well, today I'm delighted to bring on someone who knows a lot about the budget, what's going on in the economy, and a lot more up in D.C. and across the country. And it's none other than David Ditch. David, welcome to the Let People Prosper Show.
Thanks for having me.
Well, it's really a pleasure to have you on. We've known each other, been friends for a while, so it's good to have a good conversation. But before we get into all the fun stuff, let me go ahead and read your bio for the audience, and then we'll jump right into it. So today's guest is David Ditch, Senior Analyst in Fiscal Policy at the Economic Policy Innovation Center, also known as EPIC, which does great work. You should all go check it out. And he does too. Don't check him out as well. With over a decade of experience examining the federal budget, David has worked at various institutions, including the Senate Budget Committee and the Heritage Foundation, where he helped launch the Grover M. Hermann Center for the federal budget. He has been published at FoxNews.com, the Los Angeles Times, the Chicago Tribune, and many more, and is known for cutting through Washington's spin with data-driven analysis. David's here to talk about how we can finally rein in spending before the debt crushes our future. So we've got a lot to talk about here today, David, because there's a lot going on, of course. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, why do you do what you do every day?
So I've been interested in politics and policy for a long time. I started listening to Rush Limbaugh when I was like 9 years old. But it wasn't until the Tea Party movement in 2010, I felt like there was a lot of energy behind trying to limit the size and scope of government. There's a lot of people who were elected into the House and Senate, some of whom are still here, still fighting the good fight. And I figured I wanted to get in the fight. I moved to the swamp in 2011. Spent a few years, sort of on the grind, doing internships, attending grad school, and finally was able to land a position at the Senate Budget Committee, where I was in charge of budget enforcement for the appropriations and agriculture portfolios. And oh my gosh, when you get to look behind the curtain at what goes on with appropriations legislation, it is absolutely beyond imagining the size and scope, the amount of money, the amount of programs, the amount of tiny little bureaucracies that almost no one has ever heard of that are getting tax dollars every single year. And that helps to really solidify how important I view this work.
Yeah. Great. And where did you grow up, David?
So I originally grew up in Western New York. Go Bills.
Okay.
And one thing that's important to understand for those of you who've never been there is Western New York has a lot more in common with places like Ohio, Indiana, Wisconsin than it does with New York City. It's a place that it used to be, frankly, the breadbasket of America. There's still a lot of farm, a lot of beautiful natural scenery. Unfortunately, at the same time, I've gotten to witness firsthand the devastation of bad government policy because, unfortunately, Western New York is governed much more by the whims of politicians and voters from the New York City area, has very little ability to sort of dictate its own economic future. The population in Western New York has been stagnant for a long time. A lot of rural towns have been suffering, haven't been able to grow, and have been, frankly, decaying in some cases. It's really sad to watch. And at the same time, and this is really, frankly, maddening to me. When I moved to the Washington, D.C. area, I was able to see firsthand all this wealth and growth and opportunity, which is financed by extracting the hard-earned tax dollars of people from across the country. You can see all the construction cranes around the area, whereas you almost never see construction cranes in Western New York because it's been strangled by big government and high taxes.
Wow. Well, yeah. So that gave you a firsthand experience of being out in West New York, not the city, but the state, and seeing how this was influencing you and your family and others around you and everything else. And I'm sure that what were your parents doing at the time? Like, did they help distill some of this hard work and ingenuity into you?
Oh yeah, the first few years out of college, I worked for my family's small business. We sold computer hardware.
Okay,
we sold to businesses like Kodak when it was still really a thing. Yeah. And I got to see firsthand what it's like for entrepreneurs to be putting in that daily grind, doing the best for their customers, trying to earn a living, trying to do well by their employees, creating jobs, creating wealth and value. And again, so oftentimes that hard work, the hard work that hundreds of millions of Americans are doing every single day, I think gets really disregarded by politicians. They view all money in the economy as theirs to play with, and that they're almost being munificent and magnanimous by allowing us to keep a small portion of what we're earning, which is exactly backwards.
Yeah. They got to steal it from us and then give it away to someone else along the way. And many of those people suffer in the process. It's terrible. And now you've been in DC, the quote unquote swamp, for a while. You know, I think we met whenever I was in the White House in the administration, in June 2019 and May of 2020 when I was there. And that was a wild time. But I learned a lot from you during that time about, the budget, as you said earlier. I mean, there's just so many pages and programs and dollars. And if you can imagine, David, at that time, it was $4.6 trillion was the budget, which sounds great now. But even then, I was like, no, this is too much. What's going on? And now we're at close to $7 trillion, or around $7 trillion. It's not getting any better, is it?
Yeah. And unfortunately, in a couple of years, we are on pace to hit the $10 trillion threshold. I mean, it's beyond comprehension. And one of the things I think is important to sort of distill down is to look at what is just $1 billion, only $1 billion. A middle-class household in this country pulls in about $100,000 per year, whether that's one upper middle class earner or two middle class earners. $100,000 for most people takes a lot of hard work to bring in. Mm-hmm. It takes 10,000 people putting in that day-to-day grind, 52 weeks a year, to 10,000 people, a small city, to produce $1 billion. And in Washington, D.C., $1 billion is an absolute afterthought. It is a nothing burger. The number of ways that we waste $1 billion every single year through federal programs is beyond calculation.
Yeah. Oh man, definitely. What about being on the Senate Budget Committee? Or there, I mean, that had to really open your eyes on so much that was going on. How was your time there?
The weird thing is, I felt like the Senate Budget Committee is where I could make a difference. I mean, on paper, you would think that a budget nerd, that would be the dream job.
Right.
And I left after a little over 3 years because I was twiddling my thumbs. I was sitting on my hands most of the time. The Budget Committee, unfortunately, had very little control over deficits and spending. And was more reactive than proactive. Now, I think this year the budget committees, especially, I would give a little more credit to the House Budget Committee, has been a little more proactive with the reconciliation process. But even then, the budget process is so badly broken. That's why I ended up leaving and joining the Heritage Foundation, and then later joining Epic, because I feel like I could make more of a difference from the outside. Raising awareness among the American people.
Yeah. David, I felt that a lot too. Like, it was a great experience, and as I'm sure yours was too, being at the White House at OMB and working on all the stuff. But I also felt like I was just like hitting my head up against the wall because there wasn't much that I could do. And especially at the time, I was chief economist at OMB. You can't really say a lot publicly. So I couldn't really talk negatively or otherwise to the public. And it gave me more of this incentive to get back out there. Then, of course, COVID hit and I was like, well, I got to get out of here. I had to go back home to Texas and everything. But you're right. I think there are so many people that are within either the administration or within the halls of the Capitol who are just like, how do I get out of this? How do I break out of this? And so you took that and went to Heritage Foundation for a while. How was your experience there?
It was so liberating to be able to, again, to engage with the public, be able to do my own, independently guided research, to write op-eds, to write reports. And there are lots of reports that I was able to write while I was there that are still, frankly, I believe, really valuable long-term resources for various problems that the country is facing. And there are so many wonderful people within Heritage. And one of the reasons why I was, eventually made the decision to come to Epic is that Epic has a lot of former Heritage staffers, a lot of those same, the same healthy work culture. It's a place where I feel like I can get a lot done, be productive without having a lot of stress, which unfortunately is one of the downsides in many cases to working on the Hill.
Yeah. So Paul Winfrey, who's the president, I guess, and CEO of Epic, he was there for a long time. I've had him on the show as well. We had a great conversation, and others there too. And I mean, it's just a great staff that y'all have built there at Epic already. And then you came on board too. I think you said 6 months ago. So it's just phenomenal, all the work that you're doing there. And what are some of the big issues and items that you have been working on and that you see that you'll be working on maybe for the next year or so?
So the Epic was really at the forefront of leading in the creation of the One Big Beautiful Bill.
Yeah.
And right now we are pushing for a sequel, whatever it might be named. Congress has an opportunity to pass one or two more reconciliation bills during this session. And for as much as the One Big Beautiful Bill got done, there is a tremendous amount that was left on the table because there was a desire to get the bill finalized, to get, especially in the tax code, to get that certainty locked in well before the end of the fiscal year, before anything had a chance to expire. But there is a big need for more reforms, and especially, I would say, for more deficit reduction.
Yeah. And particularly from spending restraint, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because as far as I know you, David, I don't think you'd be offering like tax hikes along the way.
There are different ways to look at it.
Yeah.
There are a lot of loopholes in the tax code that, if we got rid of them, they might be considered as revenue increases. But I look at it as spending through the tax code.
Yes. That
some people don't have to pay the same burden as other people because they do, they're politically favored. And I think we need to level that playing field.
Yeah. And there's lots of those, of course. And then you have a constituency that's behind it that will push back. The big one that we saw was the SALT deduction, right? The state and local tax deduction. The TICJA, Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, brought it to $10,000. And then a lot of the folks up in maybe New York or other places where they have high state and local taxes kept demanding that it be raised. And then they raised it in the One Big Beautiful Bill to $40,000 now. I think that's a good one that we should say, okay, let's get rid of that entirely at some point. I think that's an uphill battle given the dynamics that's going on in Congress. But I mean, technically that would be a tax hike, but it's also creating more fairness and equity and not having the subsidization of low tax states to high tax states along the way. Is that kind of a good example that you'd put out there?
Absolutely. I think that's towards the top of my list. And I say that as someone who grew up in New York, who still has lots of family and friends in New York, some of whom benefit from that deduction, especially one of my sisters who's a lawyer in the New York area.
Yeah.
But I would much rather her face a lower top income tax rate at the federal level than to allow New York and Albany to have a way, have subsidization of their spending, which encourages even more spending.
Yeah, no, well put there. And there's a lot of those that are out there for the audience that should probably go away. So I agree with you on that. And yeah, I wanted to talk some about the national debt. You've called the national debt a failure of multiple groups of elites, from Congress to bureaucrats to special interest. In your view, David, what's driving that failure, and why has it persisted really under both parties? I mean, this has been a bipartisan problem over time.
Yeah, and one of the reasons why I focus so much on this is I will occasionally see commentators saying, oh, Americans don't care about the debt. Americans are responsible on the issue. That couldn't be further from the truth.
Yeah.
If you are an American and you want to know about what's going on with the federal budget, what is the state of the national debt? What is the long-term unfunded liabilities? You have to, it's not just that you have to do a little light Googling. You have to go well out of your way to get informed and stay informed. You can read newspapers. You can follow the 24/7 news cycle. You can watch Fox News or CNN or whatever your news source of choice. And you will be lucky to find more than a couple stories or articles per year talking about the state of the federal budget, especially if you strip away, the sort of the sensational headlines about, oh, is there going to be a shutdown?
Yeah.
Something where once it becomes about partisan warfare, then the media will cover it. The comparison I make is climate.
Yeah.
When there are wildfires, when there is a hurricane, you can absolutely count on the mainstream media to heavily link it to environmentalist narratives about climate change. Yet when we have problems such as inflation, such as rising interest rates, the media almost never links that to irresponsible federal budgeting, even though our fiscal problems are increasingly at the root of a lot of our national economic instability.
Yes.
So it's not just the politicians who, ultimately it's job one. They are responsible. They do know, how big the deficits are.
Yeah.
They do know when they're voting on the bill, whether it's going to mean Uncle Sam is shelling out more, whether we're going to be bleeding more red ink or not. They are making choices one session to another to ignore the mounting unfunded liabilities facing a lot of our benefit programs.
Yeah. Yeah. And David, on that point, so we have a $37 trillion national debt. Which is like the gross federal debt. But if you include unfunded liabilities, I've seen there are different estimates, I guess, based on your discount rate that you put out there and everything. But I've seen as high as like $200 trillion over the next 50 years. What's the number that you like to use that you think is the best one to use for those unfunded liabilities of Social Security, Medicare? For the audience, is look at the net present value of benefits that are paid out to folks, the payments part, and then the tax receipts that are being collected in. You look at the net present value and you get this unfunded liability. What's a good measure that you like to use for that?
The number I usually throw out is that we're over $100 trillion in the red between the existing debt and the debt that's going to be really hard to avoid.
Yeah.
And again, we can avoid it. If we take modest steps now to rein in the growth of spending in programs like Medicare and Social Security, we can go a long way towards reducing those unfunded liabilities down the road. But the longer Congress waits, the longer Congress allows the spending to grow on autopilot, the harder it is going to be to get these programs in line without more drastic measures.
Yeah. Great point there, David. I think, too, not to get too political with this, because we're both policy wonks. I don't really pay attention to politics too much, but we kind of have to a certain extent. But it almost seems like I'm in Texas, right? And so it seems like the Democrats are willing to do more individual welfare, like safety nets and boost up Medicaid, get as many people on these programs as possible. Obama did that, of course, through Obamacare. Then you had Biden come in and do a lot of that as well during COVID. But even Republicans, it will seem like in many places will want more corporate welfare. It's more for the businesses. We've seen in intel here recently from the Trump administration, or in Texas, they're funding natural gas projects and stuff that I believe should be left to the free market, to the private sector. And so it's almost like we're willing to give out more goodies, more handouts to folks. We'll cut your taxes too, but we're not going to cut the spending on the other side. And it's been very frustrating for me, David. But what do you kind of think about that?
There are absolutely special interest groups, no matter whether it's one party or the other, whether it's one state or region or another. And unfortunately, this is one of the most tricky problems for America to overcome. There's a concept called concentrated benefits and dispersed costs. And the larger the body you're talking about, the more of a problem that is. So when Washington, D.C. decides we're going to create a program that gives out $1 or $2 billion to some special interest, that cost is spread out over 330 million people. So they're not going to notice $3 here or $5 there. Those special interests are going to have a big incentive to lobby Washington to maintain their handouts, or in pretty much every case, to increase those handouts. Whereas if it's smaller, if it's at the local level, if it's a town budget has a project that's going to spend $10,000 or $100,000, there's going to be a lot more scrutiny of that money because the people know it's coming directly out of their property taxes. Yeah. Great points there. And
it is one of those things that I think is going to be difficult to overcome. You know, I'm hopeful that we can. I'm an optimist at heart, David, which is tough to be an economist and an optimist all at the same time. But I do think that we're starting to see some of this start to shed, in the sense that people are starting to feel what the true cost is of this national debt. And from whether it be the inflation from the Fed printing that money, or from higher interest rates as their mortgage rates go up, and we're going to see more of this in the future. And the 9% inflation rate, I really think, got people's attention to a certain extent. And I'm hopeful that we can steer that in a better direction for the future. Because as you mentioned earlier, was a great point, is that we've got to just start controlling the growth of spending. It's not necessarily that we need to cut spending, which I think we would agree that we should, or I definitely would want to do that. But if we could just slow down the growth and of spending, but also increase the growth of the American economy, and putting more resources in the private sector to where we're having lower taxes, deregulation. But I also think something that we often miss, David, is that cutting spending is also pro-growth. We usually talk about pro-growth policies as being, more lower taxes, deregulation, that sort of thing. Free trade, I think, should be a part of that too. But also cutting government spending, especially at a time like right now when the national debt is so high, it's keeping interest rates higher than otherwise. And so we almost have this economic growth story that we should be telling about cutting spending, along with slowing the growth rate so we can get our debt under control. But most of the fiscal fights that I see in Washington oftentimes will center on discretionary spending, but the long-term growth is in mandatory programs such as Social Security and Medicare, and even Medicaid. You could throw that in there as well. How do you think Congress should tackle these without political paralysis? Because I think that's what most politicians are worried about, is how do they get reelected if they go after these sort of programs? What are your thoughts on this, David?
One of the things I find frustrating is when I'll see conservatives act as though we can only do one thing at a time. So some people will say, we absolutely need to focus on the mandatory programs. Again, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, other types of welfare benefits, because that now incredibly makes up somewhere around 70% of federal spending.
Yeah.
A couple decades ago, it was only about 30% of federal spending. And that spending is growing as a share of the federal budget. It's way outstripping economic growth.
Mm-hmm.
And it is frankly wildly unsustainable to have these multi-trillion-dollar programs continually eating up more and more of our country's GDP. At the same time, there are some people who seem to only look at the appropriations portfolio. So these are the agency budgets that Congress votes on every single year. And there are some people who essentially want to ignore the mandatory programs, but then there are some people who act as though we should instead ignore discretionary programs. We can't ignore either.
Yeah.
So if we are concerned about economic growth, if we're concerned about America's long-term prosperity, we need significant reform of these entitlement programs in the next 5 years. We got a lot done on Medicaid. There is more to do. We got a lot done on food stamps. There is more to do. And there's a lot more than just those two.
Yeah.
At the same time as the liberties that Americans have are oftentimes curtailed by the bloat of the federal bureaucratic state. The number of agencies, the number of rules that are being promulgated, and by reining in a lot of that kind of spending, that can also help benefit America's liberty. Oh, and by the way, the discretionary portfolio is on its way towards spending $2 trillion per year. So if we can tamp down the growth of that, or even if we can, God help us, get some real cuts in,
right,
that would also pay big dividends in reducing our deficits.
Yeah, no, definitely. Well put there, David. And, my former boss, Russ Vogt, who's now the director of OMB again, this time around, he's a strong fiscal hawk. And he and I would have a lot of good discussions because he was really focused on the discretionary part. And his view on this was, and probably from the president really too, it was that if we can't get our own fiscal house in order underneath what the government has most discretion over, how can we then go out and talk to the senior citizen who's bringing in Social Security? How can we get, you know what I mean? At least that was the argument that was made. I didn't necessarily buy that because I'm like, look, but that's only a small part of the budget. I really thought we should do both. To your point, we've got to be focused on both. But it is tough politically. I mean, I think a lot of congressmen and women and presidents running for office, it's tough to say that they're going to make these changes. I'm hopeful that it doesn't take the crisis to make it happen. But unfortunately, that's probably what's going to happen. Or how do you see it?
I genuinely believe that the motivation for Washington to regain fiscal sanity, to be more responsible, is going to have to come from the American people.
Yeah.
I mentioned the reason why I moved to D.C. was the Tea Party movement.
Yeah.
That was the last time that there was a concerted push towards deficit reduction, towards spending restraint. And it happened under President Obama. It took a little bit of arm twisting, but he signed off on some of those more modest pieces of legislation. We can have that again, but it only happened because the American people rose up and said that they had had enough. And part of the reason why there was that Tea Party movement is that we had a lot of big voices informing the people that you're feeling these economic crises, these economic pains.
Yeah.
A lot of that is coming from Washington. And I believe it is going to require a lot of leadership, whether it is from, within DC, whether it's from state leaders, whether it's from people in the media, to help raise awareness of these problems that a lot of the traditional media sources are never going to cover unless they're forced to.
Yeah.
And once the people in Washington know that their constituents are demanding responsibility, then I think they're going to start making the right choices.
Yeah, I hope so. And, when you, other folks that are out there that have been talking about this a lot, of course, is Elon Musk. That's a big name. He got involved with the Department of Government Efficiency, with Doge. From my analysis on that so far, David, is I think, they put out, $2 trillion they were going to try to cut. I mean, I think that was never going to happen. But at least there was a step in the right direction of looking into the books of what's going on in DC and the executive branch in particular, cutting or stopping a lot of the contracts. So we've heard about the rescissions package of $9 billion, which doesn't sound like a whole lot. It's not a lot. For the I wish I had that much money, but for the federal government, it's not a lot. But when you look at the other savings of cutting contracts and changing up some other dynamics, have you seen any analysis of what those savings might be? And what do you see as some of the maybe pros and cons of what happened with Doge so far?
It's very admirable that Elon Musk and his friends came in with such ambitious goals.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, he is coming at it from the viewpoint of a businessman, of an entrepreneur. If we think back when he bought the platform formerly known as Twitter, and he cut like 70% of the staffers. And to be honest, as someone who's on that site, almost every single day, I didn't notice a drop off in performance.
No.
And so his thought is, okay, he knows that there's lots of waste in the federal government. And so he figured we can come in and we can cut a smaller amount than that and still the federal government be functioning, which I agree with.
Yeah.
But the executive branch has much less ability to rein in spending, especially to that degree, because it's mostly coming from Congress. In terms of tabulating exactly how much the DOGE effort has saved, that is very difficult. And that's one of the problems when the size and complexity of the federal government. It is almost impossible to know exactly how much money is going out the door, because it's going out the door in so many different directions simultaneously every single day.
Mm-hmm.
It seems clear to me they've probably saved billions of dollars. In a lot of cases, this is not just going to be about what we save in 2025, but there's a lot of potential for rollover savings. If we cancel contracts and don't replace them, that means an agency budget can be smaller, especially the following year and then each year after that. But Congress has to lock in those savings.
Yeah. Well, it's a great point, David, that I think we need to talk about more, is that Congress does have the power of the purse, whether it be the spending side, also on the taxes side. We have a lot of discussion right now, and not even discussion, but actions on the tariffs. And I've talked a lot about that on the show, but, I maybe we'll hear from the Supreme Court soon, on that this should be left to Congress, especially these wide ranging, the Liberation Day sort of tariffs that have been put in place. Maybe Section 232, Section 301, if they want to go into those areas that are more limited in scope, in size, then maybe that could be a place for the executive branch. But, an issue that I have, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, is I think we've gotten too much power into the executive branch. Whether it be Democrat or Republican, it just seems like there's been so much handed to them. And maybe it's from Congress's inaction over the years, and they've taken the action upon themselves to do it. But I'm worried that this might get us into an even worse fiscal situation. And we've seen some of that go down with the Trump going after the Fed and Powell to lower interest rates to help with the deficit. Well, that's one reason, right? I don't know all the reasons, but at least there's that reason to help with the deficits over time. Do you see any complication with this, or what are you thinking about this?
I think you're exactly right that Congress has delegated far too much authority, because at the end of the day, Congress was initially designed to be the more democratic, the more accountable branch of the federal government. The executive, even though it is still nationally elected, it is still one person who is elected once every 4 years. And especially if, nowadays, if someone's in their second term, in theory, they aren't facing that electoral accountability down the line. So they are, in theory, up to their, they are doing whatever they see fit. We can look at how much more aggressive, how much more action-oriented the second Trump administration has already been than pretty much the entirety of the first term. Whether you look at that as a positive or negative, I think that there has been a tremendous amount of good that has been done through the executive branch in terms of dismantling a lot of corruption that was going on within federal institutions. This work should have been done first and foremost by Congress, whether it was a year ago, or in some cases 30, 40 years ago, a lot of these messes were starting to crop up. And it is really unhealthy for everything to be left to executive agencies and to the president when we have 435 members of the House and 100 senators. They are elected. They have the power of not just of the purse, but they have oversight powers. They have legislative powers to really hone in on what is going on in all of these federal agencies. Are they doing the work that the American people are expecting? And unfortunately, a lot of members of Congress are more interested in getting on television, having a tweet go viral, and they don't want to do the hard work of holding the federal government accountable.
Yeah. It's tough. I mean, and then you got to think about how do you get reelected, and everything else. It's constantly on your mind for the next election cycle. So there's so many different things that are holding them back. I'm hopeful, though, that at least on the regulatory side, after Chevron deference was overturned, which I think was good, hopefully Congress will help to. But my concern here, David, though, is that will Congress know how to write things more clearly in the law that doesn't give that authority to the regulators anyway? I wonder if they've been doing this for so long now. Many of them have been there for a long time, especially in the Senate. Have they just learned how to do this so much that they're almost going to keep doing it? Like they don't know how to write it any differently to make the law clear and everything else. And sometimes you have to be a little vague to get information or to allow for the regulators and the agencies to do things that maybe is in their areas of expertise and purview. But I hope that we see a huge reform of this. But what have you seen so far in this space?
The concern I have is that congressional capacity has tremendously diminished over the last 50 years. When I talk to people who were here in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and they compare staff interactions then or members of Congress interactions then compared to today, they see that Congress is much less able to do the hard work of crafting these authorizations, these regulatory reforms, and therefore Congress is more frequently saying, giving vague directions, whether it's to the president, whether it is to the heads of these federal agencies, you get to play within these parameters, but you've got a lot of wiggle room. And as we've seen under different administrations, a lot of times, these bureaucrats will take you give them an inch and they'll take a mile. Frankly, I think the Biden administration set new records of malfeasance with that kind of delegated authority. So I think Congress has to find ways to bolster their ability to do their job. I mean, when we look from a funding perspective, the ratio of spending on the legislative branch compared to the executive branch over time, the executive branch has grown rapidly. The legislative branch, in inflation-adjusted terms, has been steadily decreasing.
Wow. Yeah.
And when you interact with these offices, they are filled with lots of very energetic, well-intentioned people in their mid-20s, in many cases, doing important work, when ideally you would want people who are making important decisions to have more experience.
Yeah. No, well put, David. As we're starting to wrap up some now here, it's been a great conversation. Where do you think we're going to be? Like, what are you optimistic, pessimistic, and what are some of the key things? Like, if some congressional members or folks from the administration are listening to this, what do you hope to see in Reconciliation 2.0 and maybe in the next couple of years? And it's a lot to ask, but I really just want to get your purview on where you think we're going to be over the next couple of years.
At the end of the day, I say always bet on America.
Yeah.
It is really hard to go wrong. I mean, we have had some struggles, but if you look at it generation over generation, our prosperity has increased. It doesn't always increase as much as we would like it to. Yeah. It never increases as much as it could if Americans were left to their own devices. But we are in a more prosperous nation. Certainly, if you compare where we are now to where we are a century ago, it is night and day. There is no meaningful comparison. We are so much wealthier. We have such a higher standard of living. 100 years from now, who knows where we can be if the politicians don't stop Americans from doing those investments, from putting in the hard work and growing.
Yeah.
If we look at, more of the short-term need, what needs to be happening? While we spoke a little bit about tax reform earlier, job number one is reining in spending.
Yeah.
And there is trillions of dollars in savings that Congress can undertake in this session. It's not a matter of whether they can identify the potential savings. It's a matter of whether they have the willpower. So just one example I'm going to give is the Highway Trust Fund, a program that has broad bipartisan support, has been around for going on 60 years now, or 70 years, I should say. But the Highway Trust Fund faces massive and worsening deficits because Congress is spending too much money and isn't interested in keeping things in balance.
Wow.
Even though the program is really popular, people think, I use these roads and bridges every single day, and moving goods and people from coast to coast and border to border generates literally trillions of dollars in value for the economy every year.
Yeah.
Politicians have taken advantage of the economic need of that infrastructure work to fund tens of billions of dollars in boondoggles, whether it's mass transit expansions that very few people ride, or whether it's the federal government paying for bike lanes and sidewalks at the local level.
Yeah.
Congress has an opportunity to save, they're not going to save trillions, they're not going to balance the federal budget, but they can reform the Highway Trust Fund through the reconciliation process and get one of the most important areas of federal activity in a way to a point where it is sustainable from a budget perspective.
Yeah, no, well put. And I think ultimately what we're looking at with this budget is that it is so big, it's tough to make sweeping changes overnight. But what I've seen is that progressives mainly, but maybe some conservative things too, have got us into this situation. It didn't just happen overnight either, that we have this overspending problem. So it may not be overnight that we can get rid of it. I think you and I would like for us to be able to do that, but it may take some time. But the key part is to start. And hopefully that's what the One Big Beautiful Bill did. I have some issues with it here and there, but the Medicaid work requirements and for SNAP, I think will be huge. I think that will help out tremendously over time. Along with the fact that how do you get people who are really in need to get those funds compared to the many people who shouldn't even be eligible under normal criteria to get back on pace. And two, there's a lot of talk, David, about how do we get the core family to be stronger? And there's a debate, I think, ongoing right now about, well, is it more government or is it not? And I really believe that the government has been crowding out the family. The government has been creating a situation that has put them in a worse situation, so they should be getting out of the way. Typically, when you have government failure, you don't double down on more government. You get government out of the way. And maybe we'll close here. But what are kind of some of your thoughts on what's going on with the family and some policy issues happening?
To me, the number one problem facing families is housing costs.
Yeah.
The affordability of buying that family home, which is so important when you want to have a family. It's one thing if you're in a city, you're in an apartment, you can have one kid. It's a little cramped. It's not the end of the world.
Yeah.
But if you want a decent sized family, if you want 4, 5, 6 kids, and we need a lot more families that are that size, if we want, if we want to prevent a lot of societal harm over the next 100 years, you really need a house. You need a little bit of elbow room. You need a yard. Mm-hmm. And it is increasingly out of reach for families in those prime childbearing years in the 20s and 30s to afford a house. This is a problem that starts in the urban cores and it radiates out. Mm. The people who would be living in apartments in the city core are in many cases, multiple people are, renting out sections of a house that a family should have.
Yeah.
Here in Washington, D.C., that's a huge problem.
Yeah.
If we allowed more growth in our cities, and here I think a lot of Texas localities like Austin and Houston are showing the way. Yeah. Allowing the market to build the housing that people need can allow those housing prices to stay within a more affordable range. And the places that are more affordable in America are attracting people by the million.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly right. David, it's always a pleasure to talk with you. Thank you for all the work that you're doing on these issues and many more, and the great work that Epic's doing as well. God bless you and your family, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thanks, Vance. Take care.
All right. Well, for the audience, thank you for joining us today. Hopefully you learned a little bit more about the federal budget, what we can do to get back on track to something that's pro-growth and positive for the future. Please share this with your friends and family. Remember, you can find all the show notes at vanceginn.com or go over to my Substack newsletter at vanceginn.substack.com. And until next time, God bless you and let people prosper.